Diagweed Galera Cordia August Fáilte Road. Welcome to Wild Geese with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And I cannot begin to tell you how excited and nervous and honoured I am to have my guest today, who is His Excellency Ambassador Dan Mulhall, who is the Irish Ambassador accredited to the United States. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, I should say.
Go mí amach go asach don cruúda bheit an seo leat inniuh agus tá lán sásta leart leat. Thank you very much for the invitation.
And me too. I understand what you're saying. My Irish is not fluent. I understand what you're saying, but I went into
those who are not fluent. I said I'm delighted to be talking to you, and
I know
look forward to our conversation.
Yeah. I just my mother was fluent. My mother was absolutely fluent at Irish, but I came from England, and my dad, so she stopped speaking Irish once because it was too much of an effort with us. But Ambassador Mulhall, what's it like being in the United States right now? You're enjoying your time there?
Look, it's a fabulous country. In the first 2.5 years of my assignment here, I traveled widely because despite what people might think at home, Irish people in America, Irish Americans are not just to be found in Boston, Chicago, and New York. They're to be found in every city, in every state in the United States.
Yeah.
And wherever I've been, I've come across people very enthusiastic to connect with Ireland, even though they may be 4 or 5 generations removed from our country.
Yeah,
they
still
have a grow for us. They still have a feeling of some kind of affinity with us. And that's been a great thing. And then, of course, the last 6 months has been very different. I've been confined really to the embassy residence, working from home, trying to do my job, keeping very busy, but obviously not able to meet people face to face to a large extent, which has been a bit of a drawback. I haven't been on a plane. I haven't traveled since March, and I don't know when I will next travel again, because I'll only do so when it's safe to get about again, and we don't know when that will be. And certainly the pandemic is a big issue in America. It's a big issue in the election campaign, which is currently coming to a close, and 3 weeks from now will be election day, and
that's right.
That very carefully. Don't take any position on who should win, but obviously interested in in following all developments, and it's a fascinating time to be here.
Yeah, we're following it here ourselves.
Of course, well, the whole world is following it because everyone is affected by what happens in America. This is one country in the world that nobody can really ignore.
It's an interesting. It's always an interesting process. The whole elections. Irrespective of who's going for elections. I remember when President Obama was being elected, I stayed up all night to watch the elections, and I suppose it was very emotional, being that history was obviously being made, and I found it very emotional. I was just taken in by the whole process. But Ambassador, when your life began in Waterford, you're a Waterford man.
I am. Yeah, I was born in Waterford. I grew up there, went to school in Waterford. All my family really are Waterford people. My mother was one of 8, and they all stayed in Waterford. None of them left, which is remarkable at that era when she was born in the 20s and grew up in the 40s and 50s when immigration was endemic from Ireland, and yet none of her siblings left Waterford. So I had many cousins in Waterford, and no one anywhere else in the world. So unlike most people, my family had no kind of connection with immigration at all, in that there was no cousins coming back from England in the summer, which would give you a kind of a sense of the outside world. So I lived a pretty confined life. I mean, we had a happy childhood. My parents were good parents. They're hardworking, conscientious. Made every effort to make sure we did our best at school and holidays and so on. But really, my knowledge of the outside world was probably confined to my stamp album. My stamp collection was probably the window I had on the outside world, because of course in those days we only had one television station in Ireland, and so the limited focus.
We were probably better off, weren't we?
We might have been better off. Everyone certainly saw the same programs. I remember myself sitting down watching the TV every evening. My father was one of these people of his era who insisted on watching the the evening news. It was a kind of almost like a religious observation for him. He had to do it. It was kind of, the whole house had to remain quiet while we were listening while we were watching the news, and the whole country watched the same news bulletins, really. And I can remember, actually, in '68, I was only about 12 years of age. I can remember the 1968 presidential election with Bobby Kennedy, and Martin Luther King was shot, and you had Nixon and so on. It was a very tumultuous period with all these student riots and demonstrations. A little bit like this year in many ways, a turbulent year. But that's the first US election I can remember. And this is the first one I'm watching from America as opposed to watching it from around the world.
Yes, that must be an interesting dynamic for you. I mean, do you find, I mean, I suppose Wild Geese, I'm very emotionally invested in the subject of diaspora and immigration and emigration. And I suppose Wild Geese, that's what Wild Geese, I took the name from the flight of the wild geese here in Ireland when Sarsfield sailed down the Shannon with his men and took up arms for battles all over the world rather than swear allegiance to the crown. And so they were, if you like, the first emigrants, if you like. So that's what the name Wild Geese comes from. But do you find that the Irish, and I suppose being involved in Irish dancing worldwide, do you find that the Irish abroad tend to be, I know it's probably a cliche, but tend to be even more Irish than the Irish at home, because we tend to take things for granted that are totally embraced by those who have even an ounce of Irish blood in them?
Sure. Well, look, I've had 5 heads of mission posts now where I've connected with the Irish diaspora. Edinburgh, Kuala Lumpur, Berlin, London, and Washington. Now, they're all very different, Obviously, in Edinburgh, you had the Irish there who came over in the 19th, 20th centuries. They weren't always well received by the Scots at the time, but they became part of the fabric of Scotland, and they're still very proud of their Irish heritage. Most of them come from Donegal backgrounds. They tend to be very strong supporters of Glasgow Celtic Football Club, so they have a kind of a tribal allegiance to Ireland, and there's still a little bit of tension there, perhaps, but that's all largely a thing of the past. The tensions were much more pronounced in the past, and now it's really down to support for a particular football club and the rivalry that generates.
The Scottish, they're the only the Scottish are the Irish that could swim.
Well, who knows? That might be a debatable point, but anyway, I'm not sure if either nation are best swimmers in the world. But anyway, we'll leave that to the side. So, and then, of course, I went to Malaysia. They're totally different. There you have people, expatriates. They're largely professional people who are working there, or they're married to Malaysians and they've moved to Malaysia, or they retired there or whatever. It was a nice community, and those people were very proud of their heritage, and they had one of the biggest St. Patrick's Day events that I've ever attended. More than 1,000 people attended the annual St. Patrick's Day ball organized by the St. Patrick's Society of Selangor. So again, they are passionate interest in their heritage, even though long way removed from Ireland geographically, but most of them would be going home on a regular basis and were in contact with families and so forth. So that was a very different story. Likewise in Germany, big number of Irish there, maybe 20,000 Irish in Germany, again, mainly professionals. So it's when I came to Britain that I came across what you might call an Irish diaspora on a big scale.
Yes, because you were ambassador to Britain, and you were ambassador to Germany.
Germany, that's right.
You were secretary at the embassy in Vienna at one stage.
And that's right.
So in Thailand during the
during the tsunami, yeah, that's right.
So you've been in many places, and you've led a really exciting life.
Yes. I mean, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to serve my country in very interesting places and challenging places at times. The tsunami is one you mentioned, but also being in Germany during the financial and economic crisis that we had 10 years ago was no joke either, and that we had to really battle hard to defend our reputation there because of all the economic problems that were surrounding us at that time. Now, of course, and then of course I was in Britain for the Brexit referendum and the fallout from that, which was quite difficult too. Yeah. And now in the United States, I'm obviously dealing with the effects of the pandemic. So I've had challenges everywhere I've been, but they've all been very exciting posts. But to come back to the diaspora point, in Britain, you have 750,000 Irish-born people.
Yeah.
Right. You probably have 10 million people of an Irish background, maybe more, because of course they've been going to Britain since the 19th century in large numbers, since the time of the famine.
Yeah.
But the difference is between Britain and here is that in Britain, people of Irish descent don't really identify with Ireland to the same degree as they do in America. They may have an Irish name, they may be Catholics, they may have some sense that my granny was Irish or my great granny was Irish, but they don't see themselves as British Irish or Irish British. They are part of British society, because Britain doesn't really lend itself to people having a separate identity alongside the British identity. Whereas in America, that is very much part and parcel of who Americans are. Americans are quite happy to advertise their dual identities, and therefore Irish Americans, 40 million of them or so, maybe 35 million or so, who knows? The census that's been taken at the moment will reveal how many Irish Americans there are these days. But the fact is, it's somewhere between 33 and 40 million people.
Do you think
with an Irish
because
background.
Britain don't really teach Irish history in schools to the extent that we teach world religion here in Ireland? We have a more, I suppose, a rounded education outside of. I know America, they tend to learn quite a lot about their own country, but within Irish American homes, they completely embrace their Irish American status.
I mean, when I came to America, I discovered quite a different set of circumstances here, because all over the country, everywhere I traveled, I came across Irish people and people of Irish descent who were proud of their Irish heritage, even though in many cases it comes from 100 or more years ago. The reasons for that, I think, are not difficult to figure out. First of all, when the Irish came here, they came with a sense of grievance. They believed that they had been driven out of their homeland, and they passed that sense of grievance on to their children and grandchildren and down through the generations, and it still exists today. Secondly, they weren't well received by the local population in many cases. They were resented because they were poor, they were newcomers, they were Catholics, and that caused them to bond together and to, in particular, create their own parishes, their own churches, build their own churches, form their own organizations like the Ancient Order of Hibernians and things like that, in order to come together to protect their interests in a society which didn't always welcome them. And that tradition has continued to this present day. And it's extraordinary to me how many people I meet, distant from Ireland in terms of their heritage, but deeply committed to that heritage because of the ancestral traditions that were passed down to them from generation to generation. And very supportive of Ireland, supportive of Irish causes, feel a great affinity with Ireland, and a great admiration for Ireland too.
Yes, but of course the Irish worked really, really hard as well, and they really rose through the ranks in the police force in the United States, and they rose in politics. So they've been very, very strong. I suppose I see a correlation in many respects between the Irish and the Jewish communities, because they tended to stay within their own communities, and they tended to lift their own communities up, if you like, wherever they went, because they felt, I suppose, in many respects, outsiders. So they looked after themselves. And I think that has actually transcended generations. I think we're all a bit like that. Anytime I ever went with Bunratty Castle to France, promoting Ireland, we all made our way straight away to the Irish pubs or the Irish, anything that was Irish, and before you did anything, because you felt that sense of similarity, of oneness with people that you don't look for here in Ireland. You don't really feel the need to go out and look for people who are the same as yourself in Ireland. But when you're abroad, you do. Yeah. Do you find that?
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. And wherever I've been in the world, I've always gravitated towards Irish people, and we always have a certain kind of instinctive affinity with each other, which seems to be stronger for us than it is with other countries.
Yeah, well, Dennis Staunton, the London editor, described you as the ambassador who defied categorization.
Very kind of him. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's very kind of him anyway.
Did you read what he said about you?
I did.
It's amazing. He said Mulhall. He said he brought a depth of historical knowledge and insight to the commemorations of the First World War and the Rising, the 1916 Rising, and great passion to Yeats' 150th anniversary year in 2015, tweeting a line of poetry every day. Now, you're a man after my own heart, Ambassador, because I love Yeats. I've always loved Yeats. I can remember in primary school in 6th class painting, doing a painting to represent the school, but it was based on the wild swans at Coole. But I suppose my own, I have my own, I suppose, 3 favorite Yeats poems, and one of them is the Song of the Wandering Aengus.
I often read that. I often read that poem.
Oh, it's just absolutely beautiful, and the Heaven's Embroidered Cloths is my particular favorite.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I rather like the later poems. I love Easter 1916 because I think it's kind of like, if you're going to read anything about the Easter Rising and you only have 10 minutes, I'd read that because it gives you an insight into the Rising in many ways that's as good as most books that I've seen on the subject, and that it covers a lot of the issues that arise from the Rising and the controversies that surrounded it. You know, Yeats was one of the first people to ask the question, was it really necessary, and so on. But yet, I think he comes to the conclusion in the end that it probably was, which is my own conclusion as well as a historian. But yeah, I've been tweeting poetry now for 5 years. I started doing it during the Yeats anniversary year. I did it for the whole year, and then people started saying to me, you must keep it going. And I have kept it going, but now I tweet from different poets. I tweet from, like this morning, I tweeted from a poem by Paula Meehan, who's an Irish poet from Dublin. Yesterday, I tweeted from, I think, Micheál O'Shiel, another Irish poet. So,
Micheál O'Shiel, I've quoted Micheál O'Shiel in my thesis. Most of my epigraphs are from his.
He's a great man for epigraph. He's a great man for. I tweeted from a poem called the five quartets, it's called, and it's a kind of a history of the world in poetry, which is really very, very good and very, very impressive piece of work. So I tweet from poets from early Irish monks in translation up to contemporary poets like Jessica Traynor and Elaine Feeney and Sean Sexton, people like that. So I try to cover the whole range of Irish poetry. I do it because it's a way of putting a thought for the day out there on the Twitter sphere.
And I do it on Facebook. I've been doing it for the last, I suppose, 2 years on Facebook, every now and again, tweeting, always something from Yeats, because Yeats, or strangely enough, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. I just find that book, Man's Search for Meaning, the thoughts within it, the lines within it, are great for people to think about their own lives and to think about putting things into perspective.
When You Are Old by William Butler Yeats. When you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace and loved your beauty with a love false or true? But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, whisper a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. Well, I've always enjoyed reading poetry, but I haven't read a huge amount of poetry for a number of years until 2015, which was the 150th anniversary of the birth of William Butler Yeats, our great national poet. But I was prevailed upon by a number of people who said to me, you must keep it going. So I decided that I would shift the focus from Yeats to Irish poetry generally, and sometime make the time to drive out west into County Clare along the flaggy shore in September or October, when the wind and the light are working off each other. Well, people tell me that they like my Irish poetry tweets because it's kind of an antidote to some of the more contentious exchanges that Twitter is famous for. So people say that they like it because it's a piece of contemplation. It's a thought for the day, if you like. And inland among stones, the surface of a slate grey lake is lit by the earthed lightning of a flock of swans. For me, our literature is part of Ireland's calling card. I've always taken that view. And for that reason, I think it's important as an Irish diplomat that we profile our culture. And so my daily poetry tweet is a small effort to fly the flag for Irish poetry and for Irish culture in the Twitter sphere.
But you're the honorary president of the Yeats Society.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I first became interested in Yeats when I was at college in Cork. I bought a collection of his selected poetry and I read it over the summer. I remember when I was studying for my BA. In those days, the honours BA was done in the autumn. You did your exams in September, and I did that. And I read Yeats that summer, and I ended up doing a thesis on Yeats. But Yeats's kind of value to the historian. In other words, Yeats's work as a kind of an insight into the history of Ireland at that troubled time. And I've continued to take an interest in that subject ever since. And in fact, the book I published there in 1900, book I published in the year 2000. I'm not that old, happily. It was called A New Day Dawning, A History of Ireland in 1900. And that focused a lot on Yeats and used Yeats as a source. So I've tried to use Yeats as a source for my work in understanding Irish history. And I think he's a very valuable source indeed. And that's why I've taken this passionate interest in Yeats over the years. I spoke about him all over Britain during the 2015 anniversary year. And I've continued to talk about Yeats.
I look at poetry and, you say to yourself, it's like art. You can guide a person in art as a lecturer, and you can guide them in poetry. But can you teach a person to actually feel a poem? You can guide them, but I think poetry is something it's like art. You either feel it in your soul, and I think when you look at the movie with Robin Williams, Dead Poets Society, and I think it came out really clear in that actually, how you cannot actually, you can sit down and you can talk about things like iambic pentameter, and you can talk about the rhyming schemes of poems and all that, and the structures of poems. But you can't teach a person to actually feel about it the way, say, for instance, I feel when I read Yeats poetry, especially the ones that are obviously written about Maud Gonne and the unrequited love. And I think it's probably the romantic in me when I hear, and to a child dancing in the wind. And when you hear that and you think, gosh, when the very... that a man could actually sit down and write that about a woman, or anyone could put in.
But there are other poets as well. I mean, I also obviously admire the work of Seamus Heaney, and I often think of Postscript, this great poem of his about the flaggy shore. And sometime make the time to drive out west into County Clare along the flaggy shore in September or October. And there's something about that. It's that the words have a kind of there's an imagery there. The flaggy shore, but also just the way the words jog along. Sometimes take the time to drive out west. It's as if it's the only way you could possibly express that sentiment. So what I find about poetry is that you have a combination of the sound and the images that come together to give you a kind of a verbal hit, which you don't get from other forms of writing.
No, and I mean, there's a line in that postscript, and it says, "You are neither here nor there."
Not there. Yeah.
And it's funny that's in a direct. I suppose our motto here for our station is "Wherever you are, we're here." So if you're neither here nor there, which is very true in your case, because you could be anywhere in the world. You're neither in America nor, and I suppose it's the same.
I'm always in Ireland. I'm always representing Ireland.
Pardon?
I feel very strongly that wherever I've been in the world, I haven't been an immigrant.
No, you've
always been working for Ireland. So I've always been surrounded by Irish.
Yeah.
which is a very strange situation to be in, because you're living in a country, America in this case, Britain before, Germany before.
You're representing Ireland.
But everything I do has to do with Ireland. Because even if I go to an event that's nothing to do with Ireland, the fact that I'm there as the ambassador of Ireland, people come over to talk to me, I'm talking about Ireland. So you can't escape as a diplomat from being the personification of Ireland in the country where you happen to be posted for that period of time.
That's very true. But, you know, I mean, you are of Ireland. So you are not just from Ireland, you are of Ireland when you're an ambassador, because you always have to be conscious of the country that you're representing. Sure. You were actually there in London when Brexit happened.
Yes.
You were there when the World Irish Dancing Championships happened.
I spoke at that, yes.
You did, and you launched Dr. John Culnan's book.
I did.
Which he was very proud of. He said to me, "Don't forget to mention me to the ambassador."
I have it on my bookshelf over there, in fact, at the moment. Yeah.
John has been on with me 4 times. He's coming on again now to talk about setting up Irish dancing in America and Canada and Australia and the rest of the world. But when you received the freedom of London, how that must have been absolutely fabulous.
Well, I received 2 freedoms within a year of each other.
Waterford and London.
And I suppose the Waterford one means more to me. Of course, because my family were involved. Everyone was there from the family. Yeah. The London one was also a great treat, because I had worked hard, trying to build connections with the City of London, because there's an important part of our connection with Britain is the financial services link, and the City of London, of course, is the place where the financial services industry is located in London. And I was very pleased that they decided before I left that they would grant me the freedom of the city, because I don't think any ambassador had it before. Certainly no Irish ambassadors had it before, as far as I'm aware. And I felt that was a great recognition of the fact that Ireland was now a very important partner for Britain, for London, and for the financial services industry in the City of London, because we ourselves now have a major financial services centre in Dublin. It'll never be the same size as the one in London, but it's certainly growing all the time, and it's recognised now as a place of quality. And that's why the City of London were very happy to link up with me and make that connection with Ireland, because of their affinity with the financial services industry in Ireland.
There clearly is a political impasse, and we all know the only way to resolve a political impasse is to find solutions, and those solutions can only be found by talking and by doing things that are conducive to agreement. You look back at the progress that's been made since the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. Northern Ireland has been transformed. North-South relations have been improved beyond recognition, and indeed British-Irish relations have also improved enormously. Clearly, the open border and the relationship between North and South in Ireland is a key pillar of the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. Now, nobody would suggest that the peace process is threatened by Brexit, but obviously there are issues to do with the border which need to be dealt with. What I find when I talk to people at home in Ireland, people who are not involved, say, in politics or in the diplomatic world, they tend to be a bit bewildered and confused and surprised by the whole thing. It will be a strange experience for Ireland to find itself a member of the European Union without its nearest neighbour. And that's why we were hoping that the referendum would turn out to have been a Remain vote. Didn't work out that way, and therefore we have to accept, of course, and we do accept that this is a decision that's been made by the British people, and now we have to make the best of it, and we have to try to minimise the negative effects for Ireland, for North-South relations in Ireland, and for Irish-UK relations. Ireland is committed to continued membership of the European Union. We want the European Union to flourish and prosper. At the same time, And there's no contradiction between these two statements. We want to continue to have the closest possible relationship with our neighbours in the UK. That relationship will be more difficult to manage when the UK is outside the European Union, but it's not an impossible task. It can be managed and will be managed, in my view. So it's not a question of either or. It's a question of minimising the negative impact on Ireland of the UK's departure from the European Union, including by preserving, as best we can, the very positive relationship that has developed between the UK and Ireland in recent decades.
Well, I'm trying to avoid asking you any questions that are political, but
ask me, and I will give you the answer that I can give you.
No, I'm just saying how with Brexit and Ireland, and I know you're very conscious of the peace agreement, the signed peace agreement in the north, as am I, because that's what my doctorate was on, was brokering peace, I suppose, between, well, I looked at it from World War II perspective and children, but how we can actually understand the other, if you like. But you know, do you accept that that England has a right to look for its independence from Europe, number one? But do you think that leaves the door open for a united Ireland? And how possible do you think it's going to be for a united Ireland if people have to make a choice between remaining in the UK, remaining with the UK and thus leaving Europe, or staying with Europe and thus becoming a united Ireland?
Well, first of all, I completely reject the idea that Britain is getting back its independence through Brexit. Britain was independent all along. It's independent as a member of the European Union, was for the last 45 years, is today, will be tomorrow. So the independence issue is completely irrelevant. We are an independent, proudly sovereign, independent state that happens to be a member of the European Union. Unfortunately, Britain's notion of sovereignty, or the notion of sovereignty held by certain people in Britain, which eventually prevailed in the referendum, meant that they found it difficult to reconcile their notion of sovereignty with membership of the EU. I find no difficulty in that whatsoever. In fact, I think they're quite wrong. Those who push the Brexit agenda are quite wrong to do so. And I can see no argument really for Brexit. I mean, there's no economic argument for Brexit at all, because it's damaging economically. And the political argument is frankly quite limited, because Britain already had a particular form of membership with the EU, which meant that it wasn't bound by many of the things that it didn't want to be bound by. So, for example, they weren't part of the single currency. They weren't part of the Justice and Home Affairs area. They could opt into that as they chose. So they had a kind of a particular version of EU membership, which was, I think, very suited to them and which they made the best of. Unfortunately, that's now over. People have decided, and I have no illusions, but that Britain will finally, after the transition period ends at the end of this year, Britain will be outside the European Union. I hope they'll be outside with an agreement that keeps them fairly closely connected with the European Union, because that's the best option for us. When it comes to Northern Ireland, there's a protocol which commits the British to never having a border on the island of Ireland. Now, it means they must have some controls on the Irish Sea to protect the European
How do you think that's going to work? How can you see that? How can you see that working?
I think it can be made to work very easily. I don't think there's a major issue there, but it is an issue still. There is still negotiations going on, but I believe those negotiations can and I hope will be resolved.
They have to be. They have to be maintained.
The protocol applies. Whatever happens to the relationship between the EU and the UK, that protocol still applies.
We can't go down the road. We can't go down the road of the past. You know,
you want to turn the clock back. So to come to your point about a united Ireland, you know, that is covered in the Good Friday Agreement. I was in Belfast in April 1998 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. Obviously it was ratified by the people of Ireland, North and South, and it is an international agreement. And that agreement does provide for a referendum on Irish unity at a certain stage in the future, when assessment can be made that there's a sufficient number of people supportive of Irish unity in order to justify having a referendum. And then if that referendum takes place, if there's a majority in favour in Northern Ireland, in favour of United Ireland will come about. So, but my point is that and I think the point of many people in Ireland is that this is something that needs to be prepared for. It needs to be worked towards. You can't just ask the question now. We know from the Brexit referendum that they asked the question about Brexit, and most people in Britain didn't know what they were being asked to decide on. They didn't understand what Brexit really meant. And I think we have to work on over the next few years, and that's what's being done in the Department of Taoiseach now. There's a new unit, a shared islands unit, trying to work out how you could create the conditions to bring about a situation where a referendum on a united Ireland will be likely to be successful. And we have to do that before we can, in my view, jump the gun. I think having a referendum now would not be very productive, or would not be very helpful to the overall situation.
And you see a united Ireland in our lifetime?
I don't know. I mean, look, 10 years ago, I would have said probably not. I don't say that any longer, because I've seen how things can change rapidly. Yeah. Think of how we've changed so rapidly over the last 20 years, for example.
Yeah.
So I don't rule out that changes could occur very rapidly in Northern Ireland, and ones you don't expect. I mean, who expected the Berlin Wall to come down in '89, for example? You know, who expected, who expected Brexit to happen? Who expected, a lot of things have happened in the last number of years. It seems to me, at least, that the pace of political life has speeded up, and things that would have been regarded as impossible, unlikely, inconceivable 10, 20 years ago can no longer be seen in that light. So I don't make any predictions now. I take the view as, let's wait and see. Let's just take it step by step.
And I actually met you before, but of course you wouldn't have remembered me. We met at the British and Irish Trading Alliance.
Oh yes, of course, yes.
I'm a member, and
I remember that. Very good.
My best friend, Dr. Michael Casey, he's very involved with the British and Irish Trading Alliance. But
well, it's great to be here because it has to be fun, otherwise people won't come. But the important thing is that we need to cultivate these networks in order to ensure that our trading relations with Britain will continue to thrive in the future. When I'm in a room like this, I know that there are things happening in this room which will yield benefit in the future for Ireland and for our relations, our economic ties with Britain.
You're also involved with the Irish-US funds, and of course that's done some tremendous work for. You might like to tell people about.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Ireland funds provides a practical way for Irish Americans to express their support for Ireland, their commitment to Ireland, and their affinity with Ireland. And it's important from that point of view because, people have this, as I said, they have this grow for Ireland. That's for sure. That's there. It's very strongly there.
Yeah.
But in the past, maybe there wasn't any way they could express that. And the Ireland Funds gives people a mode of expression for their Irish heritage and their Irish identity. And there are lots of Irish Americans who are very happy to identify with Ireland and to support worthwhile projects in Ireland that are funded by the Ireland Funds. And I'm a big supporter of the Ireland Funds because I believe that this connection with Ireland between the Irish who have made it good here in the United States, but who still want to be connected with their homeland, that connection is a very important one, and one that I'm certainly keen to cherish.
And it's actually spread now, hasn't it, to Australia and Canada and China and all over. It's not just confined to the US and Ireland. You have branches of it.
I attended their events in Britain when I was there. I attended their events in Germany. There's a branch in Germany. They're all over the place. Wherever there's an Irish community, there's always an Ireland Funds branch. Even in Germany, where there wasn't a huge Irish community, but nonetheless, there was a group there that were committed to doing things. They arranged,
The same with the British and Irish Trading Alliance. Paul Whitnell was on talking as well. But Paul was saying, they've branched into the US as well. So, there's great work. I mean, when you look at the likes of Ed Walsh and Loretta Brennan, who did some fantastic work with the University of Limerick here, and the philanthropic involvement that they had alone, and they've been involved in the Ireland US funds more or less from its inception. People like and Dan Rooney, they've given their lives to trying to promote the Irish and trying to support the Irish. And I think
see, remember where that came from. there was a time in the 60s and 70s when Irish Americans, confused about what was happening in Ireland, many of them decided the way they could help Ireland was to contribute to collections for organizations that were supporting paramilitary violence in Ireland. And that was not the way to go. That was not helpful. It was not constructive.
No.
And I think
never.
Dan Rooney, when Dan Rooney and Tony O'Reilly set up the Ireland Funds, they wanted to say to people, no, that's not the way to help. Yeah. There is a constructive way to help. You can do things that will help to bring peace and prosperity and well-being to Ireland, but you don't do it by putting money into a bucket for a paramilitary organization. You do it by supporting an organized effort to support proper activities that will bring people together in Northern Ireland and help the people of Northern Ireland overcome the conflict that was raging there at the time. And that has succeeded. And that sort of tradition now of supporting, obviously, that's gone, and it was successfely rooted out by people who realized after a while, it was obviously John. Yeah, basically the argument was made, and by Irish diplomats, by my predecessors here over a period of 30 years, they argued consistently, don't do this stuff you've been doing in supporting violence in Ireland. Support peace, support reconciliation, support coming together. Don't put your money into causes that will actually make things worse in Ireland. And that message has gotten home to Irish Americans. And now I would say 99% of Irish Americans are fully supportive of the Good Friday Agreement. And in fact, they're determined that the Good Friday Agreement will not be damaged by Brexit. And they've become active in persuading Congress people not to allow any trade agreement between the UK and the US to come about if the Brexit process ends up damaging the Good Friday Agreement and imposing a hard border on the island of Ireland.
I can't see the Americans getting involved or having anything to do if that wasn't upheld, the agreement, or if it was reneged on in any way. But you set up the International Public Policy and Diplomacy course in UCC also.
Well, I set it up. I actually advised on it. I was a member of the advisory board for a number of years, and because I'm quite keen that, I mean, when I joined the Foreign Service in 1978, there was no course available in Ireland that would prepare you for a diplomatic career. Most of our people, I mean, the people who joined with me, some were scientists, some were classicists, some were studied languages. I studied history and literature. We were kind of a mix and gathering of all sorts of different backgrounds academically. A lot of my colleagues today now do have international relations degrees. It's not essential, but it does certainly give people a certain extra bit of ammunition that they can use during the course of their career, that they have an intellectual formation that enables them maybe to operate in a different way from the way we operated before. And of course, we now operate in a very different world from the one we operated in when I started 40 years ago. In particular, next year, we'll be joining the UN Security Council, and that will require us to raise our game. And I'm very happy that we have lots of people in our service who are very well equipped to operate in the international relations environment at the highest level, and that will be required of us when we join the Security Council in January of next year.
Tell me about, say, for instance, the Irish Famine Roadshow that you're involved with.
Yeah, well, first of all, the famine is the foundation stone of Irish America. I've visited famine memorials all over this country. There's one in Philadelphia, there's one in New York, they're everywhere. And that reflects the fact that Irish Americans recognize that their origins lie in that terrible event that occurred in Ireland in the 1840s. It reshaped Ireland, but also reshaped the rest of the world because of the immigrants who left from Ireland and who helped to change the course of history in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, and so forth. So I've always been keen on famine commemorations. I think it's part of our history that we need to remember, because it probably was the one event in Irish history of the last 300 years that had the biggest shaping effect on our subsequent evolution. And even today, I think you can see the effects of the famine in the fact that we're the only country in Western Europe that has a smaller population today on the island of Ireland than we had in 1845. That's an astonishing fact. And that is the impact of the famine. But it's also the fact that we have 33 or more people of Irish descent in the United States. That is a product, that is a byproduct of that terrible catastrophe that befell the people of Ireland in the 1840s.
Yeah, it is, and I keep going back, I suppose, to the correlation between the Irish during the famine, the genocide, and say those that suffered in Europe, the Jewish community, and the non-Jewish people who suffered, the 11 million non-Jewish who died. Is that, you know, it's the fact that before these genocides, there was far more than there is even today of Jewish people. Same with the Irish people, and their ability to actually get up and survive, their ability to get on, to succeed, is just astonishing. You know, I mean, the Irish went to America and they could have laid back on the fact that they were impoverished and that they were after leaving their country and lie back in it.
It's been a great pleasure to welcome the Famine Voices Roadshow to the Embassy in Washington this week. It's been a pleasure to have the representatives of the National Famine Memorial in Strokestown, County Roscommon with us, and also to hear from a number of local scholars who have been working on the history of the Great Famine and its legacy. The Great Famine is important to Irish Americans because it is part of the foundation stone of that great community that now numbers 33 million people who have an Irish heritage and who connect themselves with Ireland through their ancestors who came from Ireland mainly in the decades during and after the Great Famine. For Irish Americans, they connect strongly with that story of the famine immigrants who came to this country in conditions of strife and who quickly established themselves here and became part of the fabric of today's America. And it's been an opportunity this week to remind people, to remind Irish Americans of exactly what happened during the famine, and also to give them access to some of the latest scholarship about the famine. And it's been a joy for myself and my colleagues at the Embassy to host this famine commemoration and to bring to the Embassy so many people who trace their own family stories back to those dreadful times when famine struck Ireland and a tradition of emigration was established, which created a community of people in this country who were strongly affiliated with Ireland and have an affinity with Ireland, which actually is very valuable for us today as we connect ourselves with the community of Irish Americans, in part through the story of the Great Famine and its legacy.
One thing I do want to ask you about is the immigration and emigration situation. When people go to America, I'm thinking particularly now with COVID and the Irish that have gone over, people, yes, there are people who are fortunate, who have great jobs, or great careers, or great prospects because they're in college or they're lucky enough. But what about the Irish that are over there who find themselves for one reason or another without, just after landing, they don't know anybody. They haven't got a network already set up in the United States. They've gone there. Is it difficult for people? Are there people experiencing, Irish people experiencing difficulty in the United States with COVID, and particularly when you have to be at home or you're being recommended to not mix as much? If they can't mix, how are they going to integrate? If they suffer with depression in any way, or they're on the street, or what's life like for the Irish that don't have people to support them?
Well, first of all, there are many people emigrating from Ireland to America at the moment. I mean, that the immigration stream is quite a thin one, quite a narrow one. And mainly those people are getting in on visas that acquired for them by their employers, and this means there are people who have high skills and are needed, and otherwise it's very difficult to get in here. So most people that are coming in, have come in recent years, have come in that kind of context, so that there are people that have got senior positions in major US companies. For example, I was over in Seattle there visiting the Amazon headquarters, and they've got a few hundred Irish people there, Irish people who've moved there, but they were people who maybe worked for Amazon in Dublin and then moved over. The same is true in Microsoft, same is true in many of the big American companies. They have people they recruited in Ireland, and for whatever reason they transfer within the company and are now living in America, and they're on visas that are acquired for them by the companies on the basis that they have a vital role to play within the company structures. You do have people, of course, who came here maybe years ago, who never got documentation, who don't have.
That's who I'm really thinking, I suppose.
Well, there are people now. We don't know how many there are. There are, and obviously those people are particularly. I mean, a lot of them probably working in construction and in the hospitality industry, so in bars and restaurants, and of course that work has definitely been affected by COVID, and there were problems in the beginning. Back in March and April, we put up a fund which we got some support for Dublin from, and also there was fundraising here in America to help those people, because a lot of them lost their jobs overnight and found themselves in dire straits. So through the consulates and through local organizations in Boston, New York, Chicago, and in Philadelphia, we were able to channel some much needed funding support for people who were in dire straits, really. Now, that situation seems to have improved over the last few months, but who knows what will happen if the virus goes back up again in America. It's rising again, the 50,000 cases or so today, which is a lot. And if that number keeps rising, you could see further effects on the livelihoods of vulnerable people within the Irish community. But at the moment, the initial emergency has been dealt with, and I pay tribute to the Irish organisations for stepping up to the plate and for providing vital support for Irish people who were in dire straits at that time. And obviously we stand ready to support any future efforts as well that may be necessary depending on how the pandemic develops.
Yeah, but you seem to have been in places, you seem to have been in postings when important things or disasters happened. I mean, I'm thinking of Malaysia when the tsunami happened, and you were known for your humanitarian work and getting people out of the disaster zone. But you were also in Germany, which coincided with the Irish financial crisis. So, and then you were in Britain when Brexit happened, and you're
not here for a pandemic.
United States during COVID.
The pandemic is global, so that's I can't be accused of having come that. It's a global.
But when the election is happening.
Oh, well, exactly. Yes. Well, that'll be an exciting next few weeks. Certainly, things are getting very heated here at the moment. I'm watching with bated breath as to what's going to happen, but I can't comment one way or the other, of course.
No, of course you can't. But no, it's exciting. I think we're going to do a show that night as well. We're going to have people on from both sides, from the Democratic Party and from the Republicans, just to just have a chat during it. And we're going to stay up all night and watch the show. But Sharon was saying to me that she said Ambassador Mulhall, she said, could sing or dance or sing or recite a poem at a drop of a hat.
I can't dance. I'm strictly come talking, I'm afraid. I don't dance. It's one thing I don't do. My wife's a great dancer, but
I heard so much about your lovely wife from Australia. Yeah. She was as much a hit, I believe, in London as you with everybody.
She's a big hit, a bigger hit than me, I would say. She's much more charming than I am, and the same is true here in America.
She's Australian.
She's widely loved here in America by all the Irish who respond well to her, because she often says to them, look, I'm Irish the way you are, because her family came from Ireland, or her mother's family came from Ireland in the 1860s, and many of the Americans we meet here are people whose families came from Ireland around that same time. So she feels a certain kind of, affinity with them because of that.
Yeah. So would you like to recite one of your favorite poems or a piece?
Okay. Why not?
Why not?
I will recite. I told you I like the later Yeats poems, but the ones I can recite are the earlier ones. In particular, the Lake Galavinish Free. And in fact, last summer, I was in Sligo for the Yeats Summer School, and I was speaking, and I met somebody who offered to take me out to the Lake Galavinish Free on his boat. So we set off anyway one morning, a beautiful morning, out on Lough Gill. The weather was superb. It was warm. It's not a breeze. The lake was like glass. We actually went over, and I stepped onto the Lake Galavinish Free. We climbed up to the top, and I recited the poem from the top of the Lake Galavinish Free. I will arise and go now, and go to Inish Free. And the small cabin bill there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of linnets' wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core.
Isn't that beautiful?
Do you know where I was when I decided to learn that poem by heart? I was in India in 1982, and I was a friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, Geeta Sehgal, invited me to be her best man at the wedding. She was marrying a British diplomat whom I also knew, and I was best man at the wedding. And she invited me to her grandmother's home. Her grandmother was the sister of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India.
Okay.
Her name was Mrs. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit.
Yeah, okay.
And she's a famous diplomat.
Pandit
Right?
Nehru.
She's Pandit Nehru's sister, and she was a famous diplomat in her own right. She was ambassador to the UN, ambassador to the Soviet Union, ambassador to London, and to Ireland, actually. Anyway, when I arrived at her home, beautiful home on one of the nice suburbs of New Delhi, she said to me, "Oh, you're Irish?" And I said, "Yes." And she recited that poem by heart. And then she recited, "When you were old and grey and full of sleep." And I then decided, hey, if this distinguished Indian lady from the most famous Indian family of the 20th century knows Irish poetry, I have an obligation to know it too. So that convinced me that it was important to learn some of those poems, which I've done. And I recited those poems all over the place since then. I always remember that meeting with Mrs. Pandit, because she was someone who learned those poems. I asked her, "Where did you learn those poems?" She said, "I learned them when I was interned by the British in the 1930s with my brother."
Well, it's funny you should say
during
that.
Our freedom struggle.
My mum was very friendly with a woman, Patricia Lipper, and she had trained in England. Her aunts were nuns, and she would have been Mick Lipper's sister.
Oh yeah. I remember him. Yeah.
TD, and Patricia married a man, Madhu Sudan M. Amerze. He was Indian, and he was a friend of Pandit Nehru. And that's what, when you mentioned about Pandit Nehru, that came back, and he used to talk about how India fought their battles based on Ireland. They took inspiration. He who fights and runs away lives to fight another day, was kind of the motto they had. But what is it about that poem? Because I've actually done extensive research on you, I have to say, for the last couple of days, and you've read that a few times. That it seems to be but what is it about the Lake Isle of Innisfree? Because, as I say, for me, I love all Yeats' poems. I mean, I look at the Wild Swans at Cool, and people could mistake it for being just about swans, subliminally about him looking at swans. But when he talks about, I have looked upon those brilliant creatures, and now my heart is sore. All's changed since I, hearing at twilight the first time on the shore, the bell beat of their wings above my head, trod with a lighter tread. It's all about the 19th autumn, 19 years that he has spent looking at it, and about how he's coming out to the twilight of his years, and he hasn't found any love. And the swans are representative of, it's all metaphorical. The swans represent this mating for life, and he hasn't found his mate for life, and how they trod with a lighter tread once, and now everything is so much heavier. It's all about aging, the aging process, and loneliness, and people can and that's what I love looking at poetry. I love the depth that you can read into.
I suppose what I would say about the Lake Alvinish Free is that its quality is that it was written in London. In fact, I've been in the house where that poem was written, in Bedford Park in London, and it's all about exile, because Yeats was an exile as well. Remember, he was an exile from his spiritual home in Sligo, where he spent his happiest years as a child, and where he learned a lot about Irish mythology and Irish culture from the local people there. And it's this kind of thing about, you're in a city, you're on the pavement grey, and suddenly you're transported. And Yeats describes how he wrote that poem. He was walking along, I think it was the Mall in London, and he was passing by a window, and there was a fountain in the window, and the water in the fountain reminded him of the Lake Alvinish Free. And he wrote that poem. He went home and wrote that poem based on that inspiration that he had. So it's one of these inspirational moments that you have to, and of course, every word in that poem seems to be made to be there.
Yeah.
There's not a word out of place there.
No, he doesn't seem to wait.
Every word is slotted in there.
Yeah.
And you can't imagine any word being removed, or an extra word being put in, or a different word being put in. They're all perfect.
They bring the balance of the poem.
Yeah, but it is that idea of you're away from home, and something brings you back to your home place, and that is a feeling that all exiles, including people like myself, have a lot, because we're all the time being reminded of home, and being taken back there, and being reminded of memories of family and so forth, which bring you home, even though you might be 5,000 miles away or more, as I've often been during my career.
When my mother moved to England after she got married to my dad, and she used to say the rain didn't fall the same and the clothes didn't dry the same, because she came from a small community in Limerick, and she was just desperately homesick. So I suppose that, I was always conscious from an early age about the effect homesickness can have on people, and no matter how much they're embraced in there, and how good people are to somebody who's feeling that sense of longing for home, nothing replaces home. No matter where home is, home could be, I've interviewed many people on this show who are from other countries like India or Iran or Iraq, and all of them, the longing for home centers around family, centers around smells, centers around feelings that they get when they walk into a room that will remind them about their home. We tend to think it's an Irish thing because we're an island people. Do you think it's a home? Do you think? I don't think the English people who are abroad tend to miss home as much as Irish people who are abroad. Maybe I'm wrong.
There are more of us who've been abroad, so there's a lot more experience of being abroad for the Irish than there is for almost any other country in Europe, and that a bigger proportion of our people have been abroad.
Yeah.
And in many cases have left and never come back. So I suppose the yearning for home. If you think about it, the classic English emigrant in the 19th century was an official of the empire. You were sent away. Now you might have died in India or in somewhere else because of disease or whatever, but the typical pattern was you went abroad, you served your country abroad, and you came home.
Yeah.
In triumph, having served queen and country or king and country. In this distinguished way around the world as an official of the empire. So it's a different kind of experience, I think. Now, of course, there were English people who came to America, but that immigration was a lot of it was very early on, and those people, if you like, became the kind of founding people of the European settlement in the United States, and they didn't have that same yearning for home. In fact, they very quickly developed a sense that they were superior. You know, the Virginia planters, for example, Jefferson and Madison and Washington, they didn't have any sense that they were in some way kind of could be looked down upon by the English. They in fact had developed a kind of a culture and a civilization that they considered to be superior to the one they left behind in many ways. And then of course they created a political environment that was new and different, and that they were very proud of, and Americans are still proud of to this day. So I think it's a different experience, really. The Irish left home in different circumstances, and that is the reason why this yearning for home was there more readily in the Irish case than in the other cases that I'm aware of.
I think we tend to be an island or a people of melancholy anyway. Our songs are happy. Our songs are our wars are happy, and our songs are sad.
There's certainly something to that. Yes.
Yes, but you love, and I can't begin to actually imagine why, Joyce. And I say I can't begin to imagine why you like Ulysses, because I openly admit to trying to read it many times, and I've got 3/4 of the way through. I've read Dubliners and I greatly enjoyed Dubliners, but God, you know, I think it's because it's written almost like a train of thought, and yes. You know, it's almost without any punctuation, or very little anyway. And stream of consciousness.
Well, I can recommend my blog. I've been doing a blog for the last year and a half on Ulysses. I'm now on chapter 14. I intend to finish it by the end of the year, and then you'll have a complete guide to the mysteries and the magic of Ulysses. I think it's a magical book. It's got some fantastic things in it. It's got some things in it that I think are not so fantastic. And I actually advocate skipping parts of it. I say, you know, for example, episode 3, which takes place along Sandymount Strand, I recommend skipping that because it's very difficult for most readers to come to terms with it. Likewise, something like The Auction of the Sun, which is written in the you know, it takes place in Holles Street Hospital in Dublin, and it's all about birth and conception and so on, and delivery of, because it's in a maternity hospital that it's set, but it's written, the style of it starts with Anglo-Saxon English, and it finishes with American English of the 19th century, and it's very difficult for the ordinary reader to get on top of it because the style is constantly changing, and it's as if the style of the writing is more important than the content. The content is often a little bit more difficult to come to terms with. And I also say to people, don't be afraid to skip it. It doesn't matter. It's not like a detective story where you have to read chapter 1 in order to understand chapter 2. In Ulysses' case, you don't need to, because each chapter to some extent separate. Now, there are connections between them, of course. But you can read each one separately and enjoy it. And for example, I would say to somebody, start with the Cyclops chapter. Right? Read the Cyclops chapter and start there. And that'll give you an enthusiasm because it's very funny.
Oh,
and it's very wild.
I have to say, I did it when I was doing my master's, and we looked at Joyce and the American novel, and a crime novel, and 5 other modules. But I tell you, I read it and I said, I'm not one to give in very easily into anything, but I just thought, oh, my life is short enough. There again, it just started to change from language and this constant, almost stream of consciousness. And I just thought, no, you know, give me my Holocaust books, because that was the area. I was looking at diamonds and letters.
I certainly recommend chapter 12. Cyclops, which takes place in Barney Kiernan's pub in Little Britain Street in Dublin, and it's a discussion of Irish nationalism and Judaism. You'll find it interesting from the point of view of your Jewish studies as well.
They say he based that on the oh well, you could call it a pogrom here in Limerick, where the Jewish people were pushed out of Limerick.
And that was 1904 as well, when the novel was set. So. So it looks the novel is an appeal for tolerance because in that part of Ulysses, Bloom is asked the question, "What is your nation, Mr. Bloom?" Because they all suspect him. He's Jewish, he's Hungarian background. You're not really Irish at all, are you? And he says,
No.
Ireland. I was born here, Ireland. In other words, you don't have to be seed breeding generation. If you're born in a country, that's where you're from. Even if you move to a country at a young age, that's where you're from. If you move to a country and you decide to settle there, that's where you're from. But at the time, of course, a lot of people around the world, not just in Ireland, didn't agree with that particular view of nationality. Yeah. You had to be from the soil for generations in order to be a real Irish person, and that was clearly
like Alan Shatter when he was
that was an argument that Joyce challenged strongly.
Yeah, it was like Alan Shatter when he was told to go home one time, and he said, "Where by home do you mean?" Where, and he mentioned 2 areas of Dublin where he had actually been born and reared. And it is, I suppose, we tend to, I mean, my dad was English, and my mom would often say, "Be quiet, you're only a blow-in," to him, even though he was living here for many years. You had to be hundreds of years in Ireland before you were considered to be Irish.
We have a lot of people now who are Irish, and I'm proud to say that we're now a diverse country with people from different parts of the world, different cultures, and they're all Irish as far as I'm concerned. And I will defend their Irish identity.
Absolutely.
All the way down the line.
I'm here since I was 5, and I consider myself Irish.
I will never accept any notion that somebody who was born in Nigeria and came here as a child isn't Irish. I will never accept that someone who came here and decided to become Irish isn't Irish. That's the way we are. We need to be like that. We need to be open and tolerant, and we need to embrace the world. We're doing that at the moment. Long may that continue. I'm fully in support of this multicultural, multiracial society that we now have.
I never felt anything other than Irish here. Do you know, I always and do you know, it's and I think it's important. It makes us a rich tapestry of different cultures and different beliefs and different outlooks, because we can become very introverted. But when we see the world through someone else's lens or a different cultural lens, it's much more exciting. You know,
I agree.
But Ambassador, I've taken up so much of your time today, and we had a few glitches which were beyond our control. And thank you so very much for giving me your time.
You're very welcome.
And best wishes to you and to your wife, Greta. And how long more have you left in America?
The situation with Irish ambassadors is that you stay in post for as long as the government wants to keep you there. So I'm entirely at the hands. I'm the government will decide how long to leave me here. I would have another year or two, I guess, would be the norm. And I'm happy to stay here for as long as the government believes that I can do a good job here. And I believe I'm doing the best job that can be done at the moment, given all the circumstances. I look forward to going back to normal life sooner rather than later, but only when it's safe to do so, because we have to put the safety of our staff and ourselves first in this situation. But we are able to operate remotely. We are able to do our job remotely or in socially distanced situations.
It's very difficult, because I'm trying to do a postdoctoral research now at the moment, and I've been trying for the last while to get through to a lecture in UCC, and no answers, because there's nobody seems to be, everyone seems to be out of the office, or to try and, because I'm hoping to try and do it through UCC as well, but it's difficult when you're trying to get through to colleges, because all the colleges are up in a heap at the moment.
The whole world's in a heap, so we're not the only ones, and we've got to just knuckle down and get through this situation, and hope that by next year we'll have a vaccine and therapies which will reduce the effect of this terrible virus and allow us to go back to normal life again. I'm certainly yearning to get back to the normal diplomatic routine of meeting people face to face, rather than doing so over virtual platforms like this one.
Yeah.
Although I'm glad we have these virtual platforms, because without them we'd be sunk. When I was in India in the 1980s, you couldn't even phone home. You couldn't phone home. Can you imagine what would it be like being in a pandemic? That kind of situation. You wouldn't even know what's going on in the world.
Not a clue.
So the fact that we have these technologies do give us great relief. I think they make it possible for us to function.
Well, they
despite the
were.
pandemic.
It
And
was good for us because, as I said to you earlier, we tried starting up this station, and then the lockdown happened, and COVID happened, and we couldn't get our equipment down, and we couldn't wait around to start it. So we decided to start it. We've applied for an FM license, and we started doing the on-camera stuff via Zoom. And for the most part, it's gone swimmingly, and they come out really well, you know, the final products, and people are generally responding beautifully to them. So it's naturally, of course, if there's too many people on Zoom around the city, it slows everything down, and you know. But anyway, Ambassador Dan
good talking.
Mulhall,
Okay, thank you.
thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Bye bye.
Slán agus beannacht.
Slán.